My name is Evelyn Hart, and I turned 64 the week my son got married. I'd imagined that week so many times over the years. The flowers, the laughter, his smile as he waited for his bride. But what I hadn't imagined was how small I would feel standing among strangers in a hall that smelled of roses and champagne, clutching a box wrapped in plain brown paper. The day was perfect by every measure. A summer afternoon by the lake, white chairs lined up under the willow trees, and the sound of violins weaving through the breeze. Everyone looked radiant, especially my son Daniel. He'd always been handsome, but that day he was a man, not my boy. His bride Lily floated in like sunlight itself. They fit together so easily, I almost believed my loneliness had been worth it. Almost. It had been years since I was the center of Daniel's world. After his father died, we clung to each other like survivors from a storm. But then came Lily, bright, ambitious, from a family that measured worth in gold and names printed on silver invitations. Somewhere between her family dinners and our quiet home, Daniel slipped away. I tried to tell myself it was natural, that every mother must let go. But deep down I knew I wasn't being let go. I was being replaced. That day, I brought a gift that meant the world to me, something I'd saved for decades. When I placed it on the gift table, surrounded by glossy boxes and crystal bows, I saw Lily's mother glance at it, then smirk. A few guests laughed softly, and that's when I realized my gift wasn't just simple. To them, it was laughable, but they didn't know what was inside. I still remember the first time I met Lily's parents. It was at one of those dinner parties that look perfect on the outside, white candles, crystal glasses, and a piano humming somewhere in the background, but feel cold the moment you walk in. Her mother, Marjorie Moore, was every inch the society matron. Tall, flawless, pearls gleaming like moonlight around her throat. Her father, Charles, shook my hand with the polite stiffness of a man shaking hands with his gardener. I had worn my best blouse. That night, a pale lavender one Daniel once said, made me look soft and bright. I'd even saved for a small silver brooch to pin near my collar. But next to the women there, dripping with diamonds and laughter that smelled faintly of mockery, I might as well have been invisible. Marjorie's first words to me were, "Oh, Mrs. Hart, how quaint that you worked in a library. Lily tells me you love books." Her tone turned the word books into something slightly tragic, as though I'd confessed to collecting rainwater. I smiled anyway. "Yes," I said, "they've kept me company through many winters." She laughed lightly, the way people laugh when they don't understand but feel obligated to fill the air. That night, I sat at the far end of the table while they discussed vacation homes and stock portfolios. Daniel was seated beside Lily, his hand over hers. Every now and then, he looked toward me and smiled, quick, reassuring, but he didn't speak. He didn't notice how Marjorie's eyes flicked over me, assessing, labeling. By dessert, I'd been categorized as sweet, harmless, and poor. When the engagement was announced, Marjorie offered to help with the wedding. The word help should have comforted me, but something in her tone made me uneasy. Within days, she was calling florists, selecting venues, and sending me polite little emails about coordinating efforts. One message read, "We'd love for you to be involved, Evelyn, perhaps with something sentimental, like a reading? Or maybe the guest favors." Guest favors. My son's wedding had become a project, and I'd been assigned the role of sentimental decoration. When I asked Daniel if he and Lily had chosen a date, he said, "Mom, it's just easier to let her parents handle the logistics. They know people." His voice was soft, apologetic, but I could feel the door closing. In the weeks that followed, I tried to stay positive. I bought a little notebook and wrote down ideas, poems about love, song lists, color themes that reminded me of Daniel's childhood. Warm autumn shades, not the cold white and silver Lily preferred. When I shared them, Marjorie said, "Oh, that's sweet, Evelyn, but we've already picked our palette." "Something more elegant," I nodded. "Of course." But inside, something small and loyal in me cracked. The day of the bridal shower, I arrived with a bouquet of lilacs from my garden, the same kind Daniel used to pick for me on Mother's Day when he was 8. As I handed them to Lily, she smiled politely but glanced at Marjorie, who pursed her lips and murmured, "Fresh flowers are lovely, but they wilt so quickly." The other gifts were enormous. Designer bags, perfume sets, a gold bracelet that sparkled under the chandelier. My bouquet sat on the edge of the table, forgotten. That night, I went home and cried quietly into my pillow, ashamed of the tears. I told myself it didn't matter. I was just being sensitive. But the truth was I missed my son. The version of him who would have defended me. When the wedding invitations arrived, I noticed my name printed in small, thin letters, Mrs. Evelyn Hart. No mother of the groom. No mention of my late husband, whose love had shaped Daniel's entire life. It hurt more than I expected. 2 days before the wedding, I visited my husband's grave. I brought a handful of lilies and the little box I'd been preparing for months. Inside it, wrapped carefully in tissue, was his old pocket watch. It hadn't ticked in years, but I'd cleaned it, polished it, and placed it alongside a photograph. Daniel in his father's arms, just minutes after birth. Beneath that photo was a letter I'd written that same night. I'd never shown it to anyone. As I stood there in the fading light, I whispered, "I'll give it to him at the wedding, love. I just want him to remember where he came from." The wind stirred the leaves, and for a moment I thought I heard my husband's voice. Gentle, amused. He'll remember when it matters. The morning of the wedding arrived with a kind of ache that sat behind my ribs. The sun was perfect, the air soft. I wore the navy dress Marjorie had approved. She'd suggested I avoid lace, so I chose plain cotton, pressed and neat. My hands trembled slightly as I tied the ribbon around the brown paper box. I didn't have fancy wrapping paper, and it didn't feel right to hide something so personal behind glossy foil. Simplicity felt honest. When I reached the venue, a grand lakeside estate with marble stairs and waiters gliding like ghosts, I was directed to a seat near the back. "Closer to the aisle would be nice," I murmured. But the usher just smiled apologetically and pointed to the second-to-last row. From there, I could see Daniel only in glimpses, framed by white columns and bursts of flowers. He looked radiant, nervous, happy. My throat tightened. I thought of the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read Goodnight Moon. Now he was a man about to start his own chapter, and I wasn't even on the same page. During the vows, I felt tears roll down, warm and silent. Lily's voice trembled as she promised to stand by him in joy and sorrow. I prayed she meant it. At the reception, laughter floated everywhere like confetti. I tried to mingle, to find familiar faces, but most of the guests were from Lily's side. When I finally spotted the gift table, I hesitated. The boxes there gleamed under the fairy lights. Gold ribbons, embossed wrapping, monogrammed tags. I placed mine quietly at the end, a plain brown box tied with a simple white ribbon. As I adjusted the bow, I heard a whisper behind me. "Who brought that?" Another voice answered. "I think his mother." Then a muffled laugh. "Oh dear." I turned slightly and caught Marjorie's expression, the soft, pitying smile of someone who doesn't mean harm but causes it anyway. "It's sentimental," she said when she noticed me looking. "Evelyn loves little keepsakes, don't you?" I nodded, though my hands had gone cold. "Yes," I said softly. "I suppose I do." For the rest of the evening, I drifted like a ghost. I smiled for photos, danced once with an old neighbor, and tried not to notice that Daniel never came to sit beside me. When the cake was cut, I applauded with everyone else, pretending the lump in my throat was joy. Later, when the couple made their round to thank guests, Daniel hugged me quickly. "Mom, thank you for coming. You look beautiful." His words were kind but distracted, his eyes already turning toward someone calling his name. "Did you open my gift?" I asked quietly. He shook his head. "Not yet. We'll do that tomorrow. Don't worry." And then he was gone again. When the lights dimmed and people began to leave, I stood near the exit for a moment, watching the newlyweds laugh under the fairy lights. Lily's dress shimmered like water. Daniel looked happier than I'd seen him in years. I wanted to freeze the moment, to hold on to the sight of his joy. But there was also a hollow ache, the kind that comes when you realize you're no longer part of the story. Just an old chapter tucked between the pages. Driving home, the road stretched dark and endless ahead of me. The radio played a slow waltz, and I imagined my husband's hand in mine. "They laughed at my gift," I whispered into the night, the words barely reaching the windshield. "But it's all I have to give." At home, I hung my dress carefully and sat in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. I stared at the empty chair across from me and wondered if Daniel would ever understand. For years, I had saved pieces of our life, a watch, a photo, a letter. because love, to me, was memory made solid. To everyone else, it was money wrapped in silver paper. As I turned off the light, I told myself it didn't matter. He'd open it someday. He'd see. But that night, lying in bed, I dreamt of laughter echoing through a hall, and of a small brown box sitting alone, unopened under flickering lights. And in that dream, I felt my heart crack, not from anger, but from the unbearable weight of being forgotten. The morning after the wedding, sunlight filtered weakly through my curtains, turning the room gold and hollow. My shoes sat neatly by the bed, their soles still dusted with grass from the lakeside. The bouquet I'd brought home from the reception lay on the table, wilted, a few white lilies drooping toward the tablecloth like tired dancers at the end of the night. I made tea, poured it into my favorite mug, the one Daniel painted for me in 3rd grade, and tried to convince myself it had been a beautiful day. In many ways it had been. He looked happy. That should have been enough, but as I stirred my tea, I felt a familiar ache under my ribs. It was the same feeling I'd had the day he left for college, waving from the back seat of his friend's car while I stood in the driveway, pretending I didn't want to cry. The ache of distance, invisible, but heavy. On the table sat my phone, silent. No missed calls, no messages. I told myself it was too soon. They were probably busy settling in, opening gifts, thanking guests. Still, I checked again before bed. Nothing. Days passed. Then a week. The wedding photos began to appear online. Smiling faces, champagne toasts, endless captions with hearts and congratulations. I clicked through them all, searching for one photo of me. There was only one. I stood at the edge of the frame, clapping. My smile was polite, distant. Scrolling through comments, I saw someone write, "Everything looked perfect." That family must be so proud. I closed my laptop. The word family lingered like a bruise. At church that Sunday, a few of the older women asked about the wedding. "Oh, Evelyn, I bet you danced all night," one said. I smiled. Something like that. They wanted stories of laughter and joy. I couldn't bring myself to tell them about the laughter that stung. A few evenings later, I decided to visit Daniel's old room. It had been months since I'd gone inside. The door creaked softly as I pushed it open. Everything was just as he'd left it years ago. The bookshelf, the faded posters, the small wooden car we'd built together one summer afternoon when he was 10. I sat on his old bed, the mattress dipping under my weight. The quilt, stitched by my mother, still smelled faintly of lavender. I picked up one of his childhood notebooks from the nightstand. Doodles of airplanes and rockets filled the pages. On the last page, in his looping, boyish handwriting, he'd written, "When I grow up, I'll buy Mom a big house by the lake." I laughed softly through tears. "Oh, Daniel," I whispered, "you already gave me more than enough." But a small voice inside me whispered something else. Then why does it hurt so much to be forgotten? I tried to fill my days with purpose. I volunteered twice a week at the library, reading stories to children. Their laughter soothed me in a way I hadn't expected. Sometimes one of them would hug me after story hour, sticky fingers clutching my cardigan. And in those small embraces, I found fragments of healing. But in the quiet moments, at night, when the house settled into its stillness, the questions returned. Did they open it? Did they laugh again? Did they throw it away? I didn't know which thought hurt more. The idea that my gift might have been mocked again, or that it was sitting somewhere unopened, gathering dust. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled distantly, I sat at the kitchen table with my friend Margaret. We'd known each other for over 30 years. She'd been there when my husband died, when Daniel graduated, when I sold the family car. "You're too quiet these days," she said, stirring her tea. "I suppose I've been thinking a lot. About the wedding?" I hesitated. "Yes, and the gift," Margaret's brow furrowed. "What was it exactly?" I explained. The letter, the watch, the photograph, all the small sacred things that told our family's story. She listened in silence, her eyes glistening. When I finished, she reached for my hand. "Oh, Evelyn, that wasn't just a gift. That was your heart wrapped in paper," I laughed softly. "Maybe that's the problem. I gave too much of it away." Margaret squeezed my hand. "No, dear. You gave love. It's up to them to recognize it. Sometimes people don't understand the value of something until they lose it." Her words stayed with me long after she left. But instead of comfort, they deepened the ache. What if Daniel had already lost it and didn't even know? A few weeks later, I ran into one of Lily's cousins at the grocery store. We exchanged polite hellos. She mentioned the wedding again, how magnificent it had been, how flawless Lily looked. Then, almost casually, she added, "Oh, by the way, that little box you brought, that was from you, right? The one everyone was whispering about?" My chest tightened. "Yes," I said quietly. She smiled, not unkindly, but with the careless warmth of someone unaware they're twisting a knife. I think Marjorie thought it was unusual. She said she'd never seen anyone wrap a wedding gift in brown paper. Very rustic, she called it, rustic. Such a small word to hold so much condescension. I nodded, forcing a smile. Yes, well, some things don't need glitter to have meaning. I paid for my groceries and walked home in the rain. My clothes clung to me, but I didn't rush. Somehow the storm outside matched the one inside me. Every step on the wet pavement felt like walking through the past, through moments of pride, love, and now, quiet humiliation. That night, I found myself talking to my husband again. His photo sat on the nightstand, the one taken the year before he passed. "You'd tell me not to take it to heart," I murmured. "You'd say they're young, that they don't understand." The house creaked in the wind. I closed my eyes and imagined his voice, warm, calm. "They'll understand when they need to, Evie. Love doesn't vanish. It waits." A tear slipped down my cheek. I wanted to believe him. But waiting had become such a lonely thing. Then, one quiet Thursday morning, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope was cream-colored, the handwriting familiar, slightly slanted as though written in a hurry. I froze when I saw my name. "Mom." That was all it said on the front. My heart pounded as I slid a knife under the flap. Inside was a single page folded carefully. "Mom, I need to see you. I think I owe you an apology. Please come by this Sunday. Bring the photo album if you still have it. Love, Daniel." My hands shook as I read it again and again. Apology. The word shimmered on the page like a light breaking through fog. For a long time, I just sat there, the letter trembling in my fingers. I wasn't sure whether to cry or laugh. Part of me wanted to protect myself, to believe nothing, to expect nothing. But another part, the softer part that had never stopped loving him, whispered maybe he finally opened it, that Sunday. I baked his favorite pie, apple with cinnamon, just like I used to when he came home from college. I packed it carefully, along with the photo album he'd asked for. My hands trembled as I tied the scarf around my neck. When I arrived at his house, the door opened before I could knock. Daniel stood there, older, tired, eyes rimmed red like he hadn't slept. "Mom," he said, voice low. "I'm so glad you came." His hug was tight, longer than I expected. And for a moment, I felt the little boy again, the one who used to cling to my legs after bad dreams. He led me inside. The house smelled faintly of coffee and roses. And there on the table was my box, unwrapped, the brown paper folded neatly beside it, the ribbons smoothed out. My heart began to race. He gestured toward it, his voice trembling. "I opened it last night." I said nothing. I couldn't. My throat had turned to stone. He swallowed hard. "Mom, I didn't know." Daniel's voice trembled in the quiet. "Mom?" I didn't know. He led me to the table slowly, like someone afraid to touch a sacred thing twice. The morning light poured through the sheer curtains, soft and golden, touching everything in the room, the framed wedding photo on the wall, the vase of lilies by the window, and that little brown box sitting open between us. I saw the things I'd placed there with such care, the photograph of him in his father's arms, the silver watch glinting faintly, the folded letter with edges worn from age. I hadn't seen them since the night before the wedding. Now they looked smaller somehow, not because they'd changed, but because he finally saw their weight. "I opened it last night," he said again, voice barely above a whisper. Lily wanted to know what was inside. Her parents were here for dinner. They thought it was just another keepsake. But when I took out the letter, he stopped, swallowing hard. His eyes shone. I started reading it out loud. I reached out and touched the edge of the table, grounding myself. "What did you think?" He laughed softly, not with humor, but disbelief. "I thought I could handle it. But, Mom," I got to the second line and couldn't even breathe. He picked up the letter, unfolding it carefully as though it might crumble in his hands. "You wrote this the night I was born," he said. "I didn't even know you'd kept it." His voice quivered as he read aloud. My dear Daniel, tonight you entered the world, and I learned that love is both joy and fear. Joy because you are more beautiful than anything I've ever seen. Fear because the world will never love you the way I do. He paused, eyes flickering toward me. One day, you'll grow up and meet someone who fills your life with light. But promise me this, never measure love by the gifts that shine, only by the ones that last. The words hung in the air between us, fragile as glass. I couldn't speak. My hands trembled in my lap. Those words were written in a different lifetime, a time when my husband still hummed lullabies in the kitchen, when Daniel's tiny fingers clutched mine as he slept. I never thought anyone would read them aloud again. He set the letter down gently, his eyes wet. Lily started crying halfway through. Her parents, they went silent. I think Marjorie didn't know what to do. She tried to say something polite, but she couldn't, because that's when I took out the watch. He lifted it now, holding it between us. The silver caught the sunlight, casting a small beam across his face. I wound it, just to see, he said softly. And it started ticking, Mom, after all these years. Can you believe that? I smiled through my tears. Your father always said it would never stop for the things that matter. He turned it over, tracing the engraving with his thumb. I never realized how much of him I'd forgotten. The sound of his laugh, the way he called you Evie. It all came back when I held this. And for the first time, I felt like he was here, watching me, reminding me who I am. He looked up, eyes full of regret. I let them laugh at you, at your gift. And I said nothing. I just stood there and pretended not to hear. I thought it didn't matter. I told myself you wouldn't notice, his voice cracked. But you did, didn't you? I didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, filled with years of things unsaid. Then I nodded. Yes, I noticed. He reached across the table and took my hands in his. Mom, I am so sorry. I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of his palms. Familiar, grown, yet still the same. You were trying to fit in, Daniel. I know what that feels like. He shook his head. No, that's no excuse. I should have stood up for you. You've given me everything, every chance, every lesson, and I forgot that. I let them make you small when you were the biggest part of my life. Tears ran freely down his cheeks now. He looked at the photograph beside the letter, his father cradling him as a newborn, eyes alight with pride. I showed this to Lily, he whispered. She said she'd never seen a picture of me like that. So peaceful, like I knew I was safe. You were safe, I said quietly. You always were. That's what we wanted for you. He smiled faintly. Dad would have liked her, I think. And he would have told me off for forgetting my manners. That made me laugh softly, the sound shaky and real. He would have reminded you that kindness costs nothing. Daniel nodded, wiping his eyes. He would have been right. He led me into the living room where the rest of the family was waiting. Lily sat on the couch, eyes red but smiling. Marjorie and Charles were beside her, subdued, awkward in their quiet. Mom, Daniel said, his voice steadying. I wanted you to be here when I told them. He turned to his in-laws. When I opened this gift, I realized something. You gave us all beautiful things, expensive things, and I'm grateful. But what my mother gave me was meaning. She gave me my father back. She gave me a reminder of who I am. Marjorie blinked rapidly, as if unsure how to respond. Daniel, we didn't mean, he raised a hand gently. I know, but I need you to understand something. My mother's love doesn't come wrapped in gold paper. It comes in the kind that lasts. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the watch in his hand. That sound filled every corner, steady, unashamed, alive. Lily reached out and took my hand. Mrs. Hart, she whispered, I'm so sorry. I saw the way they laughed. I didn't say anything. I thought staying quiet would keep the peace. But it just made me part of it. I squeezed her hand softly. It's all right, dear. Sometimes we learn grace through silence. Marjorie's voice wavered. Evelyn, I owe you an apology. I was raised to value presentation, not sentiment. I see now that I mistook simplicity for insignificance. I was wrong. I met her eyes and saw something unexpected, not pride, but humility. Maybe even shame. We all do things we regret, I said gently. But it takes courage to face them. Thank you. Daniel turned back to me. Mom, he said, I want you to know what I'm going to do with this watch. He took it and fastened it around his wrist. I'm wearing it every day. And when we have a son someday, it's his next. I want him to grow up knowing where he came from. I felt my breath catch. Your father would like that, I said softly. He always wanted that watch to keep time for our family. Daniel smiled through his tears. Then it will. For a long time, none of us spoke. The moment stretched, tender, sacred. Even the air seemed to still around the faint rhythm of the ticking watch. Later, when the others drifted to the kitchen, Daniel and I sat together in the quiet. He leaned back on the couch, eyes half closed, the morning sun warming his face. Mom, he said suddenly, did you ever think about remarrying? The question startled me. No, I admitted. I had love once. It was enough, he nodded. I used to think love was something you could show off, like success. But last night reading that letter, I realized it's the quiet things that last the longest. I smiled. That's how your father loved. Quietly, completely. He turned his hand over, studying the watch on his wrist, then looked back at me. I think I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all these years. What's that? That love isn't about what people see. It's about what they feel when no one's watching. I felt tears welling again, but this time they didn't hurt. They felt cleansing, like rain after a long drought. When I left later that afternoon, Daniel walked me to the car. The wind had picked up. Leaves swirled in little golden circles along the path. He opened the door for me, then leaned down, his eyes shining. Mom, he said softly, thank you. For everything. I mean it now. Really mean it. I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, just as I used to when he was small. You don't have to thank me, darling. You were always the gift, he laughed quietly, his hand resting over the ticking watch. Not anymore. Now I understand who the real gift was. And as I drove away, watching him in the mirror, standing there with the sunlight flickering on his wrist, I realized something had changed. Not just in him, but in me. The ache that had sat behind my ribs for years had softened. The silence between us had broken, not with apologies, but with understanding. Sometimes love doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be heard. A week after that morning, I sat by the window of my small house, sipping tea as the rain traced quiet rivers down the glass. The rhythm was soft, steady, like the ticking of the watch I could still hear in my mind. I hadn't worn it in years, but now I imagined it on Daniel's wrist, alive again, keeping time not for the past, but for what was still to come. It had been years since my heart felt this still. For so long, I'd carried something heavy inside. Not anger exactly, but the hollow ache of being unseen. I used to think that mothers simply fade into the background when their children grow up, that invisibility was part of the bargain. But that morning, watching Daniel's tears fall on that letter, I realized something. Love never fades. People just forget how to see it. The days that followed were strange in their beauty. Daniel called every evening just to ask how I was. Not rushed calls, not the polite kind, but long ones. The kind we used to share when he was away at college. He told me about their honeymoon plans, about Lily's excitement, about how he'd shown her more old photos, the ones I thought he'd long forgotten. Mom, he said once, I want to digitize them. Keep them safe? I laughed softly. I trust your gadgets, but don't you dare lose the smell of old paper. That's where the memories hide, he chuckled, a sound that warmed my chest. You always say that. Because it's true, I said. Memories aren't just in pictures, Daniel. They're in the folds, the stains, the touch. A few days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox, hand-delivered in Marjorie's neat cursive. My first instinct was hesitation. Her name, even written gently, brought back echoes of that wedding moment. The stifled laughter, the look of pity. But something told me to open it. Inside was a simple card, cream-colored, embossed with faint flowers. Evelyn, I wanted to write rather than call. I've spent the past few days thinking about that day, about what you gave Daniel and what we all failed to see. I have been so busy trying to be the perfect mother-in-law that I forgot what makes a real one. Thank you for reminding me. Please, let me make it up to you. Dinner, next week, our home. I'll cook. Marjorie. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Pride, relief? Maybe forgiveness already sat quietly inside me, waiting for this. So I wrote back that same night. Dear Marjorie, there's nothing to make up for, only lessons learned. I'd love dinner. Let's start fresh. When the day came, I wore the blue dress my late husband used to say made my eyes brighter. Not fancy, just soft and honest, like the woman I'd become. Lily greeted me at the door with a hug so warm it almost startled me. "I'm glad you came," she whispered. "So am I, dear," I said. Marjorie was different that evening. Quieter, humbler, her voice softer around the edges. The meal was simple: roasted chicken, salad, apple pie, but it felt like a feast because for once we spoke as women, not as roles. "I've been thinking a lot about gifts," she said over dessert. "My own mother never gave me anything handmade. Everything she bought was perfect, but impersonal. Maybe that's why I thought love had to be polished." "It's easy to think that," I said, smiling gently. "The world tells us that love should look like a ribbon, not a heartbeat." She nodded. "And yet the heartbeat's the only thing that lasts." Daniel watched us quietly from across the table, his hand resting over Lily's. I could tell he was proud, not just of me, but of the moment, the stillness, the humility, the bridge built without fanfare. Later that night, when everyone had gone to bed, Marjorie found me on the porch looking out over her garden. The moonlight brushed over her face, and for the first time I saw not arrogance, but vulnerability. "I envy you, Evelyn," she said quietly. "Why?" "You raised a son who knows how to love deeply." "I'm still learning how," I smiled softly. "We all are. Love isn't something you master. It's something you keep practicing." Her eyes glistened and she reached out, touching my hand lightly. "Thank you, and for forgiving me." "I forgave you the moment you looked me in the eye," I said. The rest was just catching up. That night I stayed in their guest room. The next morning I woke to the smell of coffee and laughter. Real laughter this time. Daniel was at the table, reading the newspaper aloud while Lily whisked eggs in the kitchen. Marjorie hummed softly as she sliced fruit. It was the kind of simple morning that felt like sunlight inside your chest. "Morning, Mom," Daniel said, looking up. "Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in years," I smiled. He poured me coffee, his wrist catching the light. The silver watch gleamed softly, ticking away, alive, steady, faithful. I couldn't take my eyes off it, he noticed. "Still running strong," he said proudly. I nodded. "So are we." A few weeks later, Daniel and Lily came to visit my house. They brought a surprise: a framed copy of my letter, printed beautifully on parchment, the ink still showing my uneven handwriting. Beneath it, in smaller print, Daniel had written, "Never measure love by what shines, only by what lasts." He hung it right above the mantel, beside his father's portrait. "Now your words will always be home," he said. The three of us stood there for a while, quiet, the way people are when something sacred has been placed before them. Then Lily turned to me and said softly, "We want to name our first child after your husband. If it's a boy, Samuel. If it's a girl, Samantha." I pressed a trembling hand to my heart. "He'd be so honored," I whispered. The seasons began to change. Autumn came, wrapping the world in gold and quiet endings. I started walking again, early mornings along the same park path I used to take when Daniel was small. Children still played there, chasing leaves, their laughter rising into the crisp air. Sometimes I'd stop by the bench near the pond and imagine my husband sitting beside me, his hand warm on mine, his voice low. "See?" I could almost hear him say. He turned out just fine. And he had. Daniel visited often, bringing flowers, stories, little pieces of his new life. Once, he told me about how he and Lily started volunteering, helping organize donations for single mothers. "We tell them about you," he said once, "about what one mother's love can do." That made me cry, the quiet kind of tears, the kind that don't ache but cleanse. I realized something then. Maybe the world doesn't always honor mothers the way it should. Maybe people laugh, misunderstand, dismiss the quiet things we give. But time has its own way of revealing truth. And in that truth, I found peace. Months later, on Christmas Eve, Daniel and Lily came over again, this time with Marjorie and Charles. They brought a big box wrapped in red paper. Daniel placed it on my lap, grinning. "Your turn to open a gift," he said. Inside was another box, old, wooden, hand-carved. I opened it slowly and my breath caught. Inside was a small pocket watch, not silver, but gold this time, engraved with 3 simple words. Love that lasts. I looked up, my eyes wet. Daniel smiled. It's yours, Mom. We had it made. It doesn't replace Dad's. It just keeps the same time. When I wound it, it began ticking instantly, in perfect rhythm. For a moment, I could almost hear both watches, his and mine, keeping time together, like two hearts speaking the same language across years. And that's when I understood. Love really does echo. Not in the grand gestures, not in what the world applauds, but in the quiet spaces, the held hands, the written letters, the laughter shared after forgiveness. That night, after everyone left, I sat by the window again. The rain had returned, light and rhythmic. I opened my window just a little, letting the air in. On the table beside me lay the two watches, his and theirs, both ticking softly in harmony. I whispered into the quiet, "We're still here, Sam. We kept time." And for the first time in years, I felt entirely whole. It's been 5 years since that wedding, the day they laughed, the day everything changed. And yet, when I think of it now, the sound of laughter no longer stings. It feels distant, like a song from another lifetime. The pain that once settled deep in my bones has turned into something softer, understanding perhaps. Or maybe just peace. I live a slower life now. My mornings begin with birdsong and the gentle clink of the old tea kettle on the stove. I still rise early, the way I always did when Daniel was small. Old habits, like old loves, never leave you completely. Sometimes when the sun breaks through the curtains, I sit by the window with my journal. It's a leather-bound one Daniel gave me 2 years ago, embossed with the same words from that letter. Never measure love by what shines, only by what lasts. He said he wanted me to keep writing. So your words never fade, he'd told me. Smiling, inside I write about small things. The smell of rain, the laughter of my neighbor's granddaughter, the way the garden seems to bloom differently every spring. But more often I find myself writing about gratitude, about how life has a way of healing us when we least expect it. Daniel and Lily live just a few towns over now. They visit every Sunday with their little girl, Samantha Grace. She's 4 years old and has her grandfather's eyes, curious, thoughtful, always searching. Every time she bursts through the door shouting, "Nana Evelyn!" I feel my heart stretch in ways I didn't know it could anymore. She always goes straight to the mantel, to the framed letter. "You wrote that, Nana?" she asks, her little finger tracing the words. "I did," I tell her. "A long, long time ago." "Was it for Daddy?" "Yes, for Daddy. And can I have one too someday?" I laugh softly. "Of course you can. You'll have your own letter, full of everything I hope you remember." Then she climbs onto my lap, curls her small fingers around mine, and says, "You're my best friend." And just like that, the years melt away. The silence that once lived between mother and son has been replaced by laughter. Real, joyful, unburdened. It amazes me how time changes the way we see things. I used to think the wedding would be a scar on my heart, a reminder of humiliation and hurt. But now, when I think of that day, I see something else entirely. I see Daniel's face when he read my letter. I see the moment his heart opened. I see Marjorie's trembling voice as she apologized, and Lily's tearful smile. And I realize now, the laughter wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of awakening. Sometimes the moments that break us are simply the ones that crack the shell so light can enter. Last winter, I found the original box, the one that held the letter and the watch. It had been tucked away on the top shelf of my closet, untouched since that day. I dusted it off, ran my fingers over the wood grain, and smiled. I thought about how that box had traveled, from my hands to Daniel's, through years of misunderstanding and back into love. It had done its job. It carried more than objects. It carried a lesson across time, so I decided to fill it again. Not with things this time, but with words. I began writing letters, not to anyone in particular, but to the future. To my granddaughter. To the daughter I never had. To the women who might someday find themselves feeling forgotten, small or unseen. Each letter begins the same way. Dear heart, if you're reading this, know that you matter more than you think you do. And then I tell them everything I've learned. That dignity is not quiet weakness, but quiet power. That love is not measured in applause, but in endurance. That forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It simply removes the anchor that keeps us from sailing forward. When I finish each letter, I fold it neatly, tie it with a thin white ribbon, and place it in the box. The stack is growing, one for each year I'm given. Someday when I'm gone, I hope Daniel finds it and passes it on. Maybe it will keep time for another generation, just as the watch did. The funny thing about growing older is that you start to see how everything connects. The things that hurt us, the ones that felt cruel or unfair, they become stepping stones to something softer. A few months ago, I attended another wedding, Marjorie's daughter, Caroline. When I walked in, Marjorie ran up to me with open arms. "Evelyn!" she exclaimed, her face lit with joy. "You're here, I'm so glad." Her warmth caught me off guard. Years ago, her presence used to make me shrink inside myself. Now I saw her differently, not as a rival in pride, but as a woman who had grown, just like me. Before the ceremony began, she handed me a small velvet pouch. "For you," she said. Inside was a tiny silver charm in the shape of a heart. Engraved on the back were the words, "Grace lasts longer." I looked up at her, my eyes stinging. "It's beautiful," I whispered. She smiled softly. "You taught me that." And as I watched her daughter walk down the aisle, radiant and full of hope, I felt something inside me settle completely. We were all still here, flawed, humbled, forgiven, human. When I came home that night, I sat on my porch under the stars. The world was quiet except for the crickets and the faint ticking of the gold watch on my wrist. It struck me then. I had lived long enough to see love come full circle. To watch pride turn into humility, silence into song, distance into closeness. That's the thing about time. It teaches us that the most important moments often come wrapped in embarrassment, pain or misunderstanding, but inside them, if we wait long enough, there's something holy. I often think back to that moment in the wedding hall, me standing there with my trembling hands, holding that little brown box surrounded by laughter. If only I could whisper to that version of myself, "Don't cry, Evelyn. One day they'll see. One day they'll understand that the truest gifts don't sparkle. They shine quietly, forever." Now, as I write this final entry in my journal, the house smells of cinnamon and rain. Samantha is asleep in the guest room, her tiny breaths steady and soft. Tomorrow she'll wake up and ask again about the letter above the fireplace. And I'll tell her, as I always do, that love is not something you show off. It's something you keep alive, one heartbeat at a time. I'll tell her that her grandfather still lives in every tick of that old watch. That her father once learned a lesson that changed him forever. That laughter can hurt, yes, but forgiveness heals faster, and I'll tell her what I've learned most of all, that we are never too old to begin again. Never too old to forgive. Never too old to love louder, even after the silence. As I close my journal, the wind rustles softly against the curtains. The house feels full, of ghosts, of memories, of love that refuses to fade. I place my pen down, glance once more at the two watches side by side. His silver, mine gold, ticking in gentle unison. Then I smile and whisper, almost to myself, "Time doesn't take love away. It simply teaches us how to hold it better." Moral: we spend half our lives wanting to be seen, and the other half realizing that the ones who truly love us never stopped seeing us at all. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember to subscribe for more true emotional stories from Never Too Old.